Hello. Lindsay, are you ready? Lindsay, can you hear me? Welcome, my fellow Patriots. I am Judge Michael Warren of the Oakland County Circuit Court. I am the host of Patriot Lessons, American History and Civics, and the podcast, as well as co-creator with my then 10-year-old daughter, Leah, of Patriot Week. We are very excited that you're joining us for our second annual and first virtual Patriot Academy today. We are, when he was departing as president, Thomas Jefferson remarked that America is trusted with the destinies of the solitary republic of the world, the only monument of human rights, and the sole depository of the sacred flame of freedom and self-government. From hence it is to be lighted up in other regions of the earth, if other areas of the earth shall ever become more susceptible to its benign influence. In other words, America is a beacon of liberty for the entire world. But that is at risk in light of the large swaths of ignorance and disdain for American history, our Declaration of Independence, and Constitution. Patriot Week is an antidote to that deep malaise. Patriot Week renews America's spirit by deepening the appreciation of our founding first principles, founding fathers and other great patriots, vital documents and speeches, and flags that make America the greatest nation in world history. Many of our current holidays have become over-commercialized or have lost their deeper meaning. We need to reinvigorate our appreciation and understanding of America's spirit, and anchored by the key dates of September 11th, the anniversary of the terrorist attacks, and September 17th, Constitution Day, the anniversary of the signing of the Constitution by our founding fathers. The schedule for each day has a separate focus. Patriot Week started in 2009 when my then 10-year-old daughter, Leah, pounded on the table and demanded a new celebration for America. Patriot Week has been recognized by the U.S. Senate in unanimous resolution, as well as by 15 states with official gubernatorial and legislative proclamations and resolutions. We've had scores of K through 12 schools, community organizations, governments, law firms, businesses, senior living communities, libraries, hospitals, historical groups, public officials, and others engage in a wide variety of grassroots activities including panel discussions, speakers, lesson plans, festivals, parades, picnics, commemorations, etc. Today, we're discussing the themes of September 15th. On September 15th, we commemorate the indispensable first principle of equality, in particular, racial equality. The groundbreaking leaders of racial equality being Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, and Martin Luther King Jr., the Emancipation Proclamation, the Gettysburg Address, the I Have a Dream speech, as well as the Union flag that flew over Fort Sumter. We will begin by addressing the first principle of racial equality. America was unique in the course of human history because we declared independence. When we declared independence, we did so in defense of certain founding beliefs, what we call first principles. Those first principles include and come from the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That when any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to establish new government, laying its foundation such principles and organizing its power such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. That's here, second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, was revolutionary in 1776, and it remains revolutionary today. And we can derive from those eloquent sentences 6 first principles: the rule of law, unalienable rights, the social compact, equality, limited government, and the right to alter or abolish oppressive government. That is revolution. And throughout the Academy, we will be addressing each of these in turn. The Founding Fathers recognized this self-evident truth that all men are created equal. Now, we discussed this yesterday when we discussed gender equality, so I won't repeat everything that we talked about yesterday, but this was a revolutionary concept in human history. I think we just need to take a moment of reflection to understand this. Before 1776, we had monarchies, people that were ruling by divine right. Slavery was a huge exception to equality. There were serfs. Hinduism had a very rigid caste system with 4 major castes with thousands of subcastes, including the untouchables, who are at the very bottom of the hierarchy. For centuries, the caste system determined every aspect of a person's social, professional, and religious status in India, as well as in other countries, and it was inherited, so you could never get out of that caste. Then, of course, there was the ancient regime of France, Nazi Germany, apartheid in South Africa, and communism, which is based on a class warfare understanding of society, and we rejected all that. The founders embraced the Judeo-Christian understanding of the Creator, an understanding that the Creator has created everyone, and therefore each person is special. They arise from His handiwork, and every person embodies His blessing. Regardless of any personal differences we might have, like in weight or intelligence or speed or strength, each person is equally precious in the eyes of the Creator. Each person has dignity before the Creator, and everyone has meaning and should have worth. No person is elevated above his fellow man. Each is equally loved by the Creator and judged by his or her deeds and intentions, not by who they were born to, what family, how rich they are, all those kinds of things. Equality before the law simply requires that each individual, irrespective of race, color, creed, nationality, wealth, social status, religion, and similar characteristics, be treated equally by the government. While America had won its independence and established a free and just government for its citizens, it obviously denied freedom and equality to many of its own residents, the slaves held in bondage or the enslaved people. The existence of slavery was in direct violation of the first principles of equality, the protection of inalienable rights, and the social compact. This clash between the principles of American government and harsh reality culminated in the Civil War and the eventual emancipation of the slaves. Some of our founders recognized the hypocrisy of having slaves in the land of the free immediately, and actually so did those that were in bondage. But it took many decades before African Americans and other racial minorities will begin to approach the authentic equality under the law. Along the way, this conflict bore some of America's brightest and darkest moments. Even now, America is clearly not free of its legacy of racial oppression. At the time of the Revolution, the forming of the Constitution, equality had been largely limited to whites and men and land-owning men, but the first principle of equality powerfully worked a subsequent revolution. The equality of all races. Abolitionists and civil rights activists latched onto the founding first principles and demanded that our nation live up to them. They didn't try to tear down the nation. They didn't say, burn that Declaration of Independence because it's a lie. They said quite the opposite. They said, yes, we believe in the Declaration of Independence and make it come alive. Animate America by that underlying first principle. Fulfill that promise that you've made to everyone that we're all equal. There is kind of a movement now to recast the revolution as an attempt to embed slavery and in protection of slavery. All I can say is that that's bunk. It's quite the opposite. The revolution set on course a path that would lead to abolitionism and better, not perfect, but better racial equality for everyone in the world, or at least in America. Abolitionists and civil rights activists, as I said before, latched on to the founding first principles and demanded our nation live up to them. While there is no doubt that Dr. King's dream that we all would be treated equally is not yet reality, inspired by that first principle of equality, the nation is dedicated to its fulfillment, and we're making tremendous progress over the course of our history. The idea of equality, however, needed real people to bring it to life. Patriot Week board member Karen Wentz is going to lead us in our next section of the Academy and discuss 3 patriots who changed the course of history. Karen will introduce herself and then shine the light on those 3 brave men. Karen Wentz, the floor will be yours in just a second.
Hi all, thanks for joining us again today. I'm going to try my fancy screen sharing again. Let's see if I can. Judge, would you mind making me the host right now? It says it's disabled for me. And then
can you tell me how to do that? Because I'm having problems over here. I don't know what happened to Lindsay.
Yeah, so where my picture is at, there's 3 dots. If you click those dots, you should be able to make me the host on my picture.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
You're welcome.
All right. So our first patriot tonight that we're going to talk about is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln is a self-taught lawyer, legislator, and vocal opponent of slavery. And he was the 16th president of the United States of America and played a key role in the passage of the 13th Amendment, which officially ended slavery in America. His Emancipation Proclamation paved the way for slavery abolition, while his Gettysburg Address stands as one of the most famous speeches in American history. Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809 in Kentucky, and soon after in 1816, his family moved to Indiana. Lincoln's formal schooling was very limited because he was forced to work at a very young age to support his family. In his early years, he worked as a shopkeeper and postmaster, and Lincoln became involved in local politics, winning election in the Illinois state legislature in 1834. One very interesting and one fact that I really like about Lincoln is he taught himself the law. He didn't go to school, and he passed the bar examination in 1836. The following year, he moved to the newly named state capital of Illinois, Springfield. And for the next few years, he worked there as a lawyer, serving clients ranging from individual residents of small towns to national railroad lines. He met Mary Todd and married in 1842, and the two had 4 children together. Unfortunately, only one would survive until adulthood. Lincoln won election in the United States House of Representatives in 1846, and then subsequently Lincoln joined the New Republican Party, formed largely in opposition to slavery. In June of that same year, Lincoln delivered his now famous House Divided speech, in which he quoted from the Gospels to illustrate his belief that this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. In 1860, Republicans chose Lincoln as their candidate for president, passing over very well-known senators and other powerful candidates in favor of this tall Illinois lawyer with really only one undistinguished congressional term under his belt. Lincoln won most of the North and carried the Electoral College to win the White House. Another fact that I really like about Lincoln is he built an exceptionally strong cabinet composed of his political rivals, which does not happen nowadays. The election of the anti-slavery Northerner as the 16th president of the United States drove many Southerners over the brink. By the time Lincoln was inaugurated as the 16th U.S. president in March 1861, 7 Southern states had seceded from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America. Lincoln had ordered a fleet of Union ships to supply the federal Fort Sumter in North Carolina in April. The Confederates fired on both the fort and the Union, which thus began the Civil War. With very little military experience, Lincoln surprised many when he proved to be a capable wartime leader, learning quickly about strategies and tactics in the earlier years of the Civil War. During the war, Lincoln drew criticism for suspending some civil liberties, but he considered such measures to be necessary to win the war. Lincoln issued his Emancipation Proclamation, which took effect on January 1st, 1863, and freed all the slaves in the rebellious state not under federal control, but left those in border states in bondage. Though Lincoln once maintained, this is a quote, paramount object in this struggle to save the Union and is not either to save or destroy slavery, he nonetheless came to regard emancipation as one of the greatest achievements and would argue for the passage of the constitutional amendment outlying slavery, which he actually did not see as the 13th Amendment was passed after his death. In November 1863, Lincoln delivered a very brief, just 272 words at the dedication ceremony for the new National Cemetery at Gettysburg. This, of course, is known as the Gettysburg Address, which expressed the war's purpose, harking back to the Founding Fathers, the Declaration of Independence, and the pursuit of human equality. It has become the most famous speech of Lincoln's presidency and one of the most widely quoted speeches throughout history. In 1864, Lincoln faced and won a tough re-election battle. And in his second inaugural address he delivered on March 4th, 1865, Lincoln addressed the need to reconstruct the South and rebuild the Union, end quote, with malice toward none, with charity for all, end quote. On the night of April 14th, 1865, the actor and Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth slipped into the president's box at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., and shot point blank in the back of the head. He shot Lincoln. Lincoln was carried to a boarding house across the street from the theater, but he never regained consciousness and died in the early morning hours of April 15th, 1865. Lincoln was only 56 years old. And to end, I want to end with a quote from Lincoln. I am exceedingly anxious that this Union, the Constitution, and the liberties of the people shall be perpetuated in accordance with the original idea for which that struggle was made. And I shall be most happy indeed if I shall be a humble instrument in the hands of the Almighty and of this, his almost chosen people, for perpetuating the object of that great struggle. Our second patriot this evening is Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was one of the most well-known human rights leaders of the 19th century. His speaking and literary brilliance thrust him into the forefront of the U.S. abolition movement, and he became the first Black citizen to hold high rank in the United States government. Frederick Douglass, originally named Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, was born February 1818 in Maryland. Now, I didn't state a month or a day because those days are uncertain, but later he opted to celebrate his birthday on February 14th. Frederick Douglass was born into slavery to a Black mother and white father. Separated as an infant from his slave mother, he never knew his father, and instead Frederick lived with his grandmother on a Maryland plantation until he was 8 years old. At that time, he was sent by his owner to Baltimore to live in a new house with a new master as a servant. The wife of that house defied state law and actually taught Douglass to read. Douglass attempted to escape slavery at age 15, but was discovered before he could do so. However, he did eventually escape from slavery to New York City in 1838 and later settled in New Bedford, Massachusetts. During the American Civil War, Frederick Douglass served as an advisor to President Abraham Lincoln. Douglass played a crucial role in persuading Lincoln to arm enslaved people and prioritize abolition. During the Reconstruction, Douglass became the highest-ranking Black official of his time and advocated for full civil rights for Black people as well as for women. Frederick Douglass was a prolific writer and masterful orator. Some of Frederick Douglass's most notable works are his autobiographies, one of which is the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, written by himself. One of Douglass's many speeches is titled, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July," and was perhaps one of the most well-known speeches he gave. Some of Frederick's writings were authored to counter skeptics who doubted that such an articulate and intelligent spokesman could ever have been a slave, and for this reason is what really drove him to write his autobiography. Douglass's account became classic in American literature as well as a primary source about slavery. Douglass served as Assistant Secretary of the Santo Domingo Commission and the District of Columbia. He was Marshal and Record of Deeds, and finally he was appointed U.S. Minister and Consul General in Haiti. Frederick Douglass died in the late afternoon or early evening of Tuesday, February 20th, 1895 at his home in Washington, D.C. Frederick Douglass sought to embody 3 keys for success in life: believe in yourself, take advantage of every opportunity, use the power of the spoken and written language to effect positive change for yourself and society. And then for our last patriot this evening, we're going to talk about Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was a scholar and minister who led the civil rights movement in the mid-1950s. He was memorialized by Martin Luther King Day, which we celebrate every year. Martin Luther King was born on January 15th, 1929. An interesting fact about Dr. King was that he was actually given the name of Michael Luther King, but later changed his name to Martin. His grandfather began the family's long tenure as pastors of the Baptist Church in Atlanta, serving from 1914 to 1931. His father has served until his death, Martin Luther acted as co-pastor with his father. Dr. King's father was a very big influence on King's life. His father fought against racial prejudice not just because his race suffered, but because he considered racism and segregation to be an affront to God's will. He strongly discouraged any sense of class superiority in his children, which left a very lasting impression on Dr. King. For his education, Dr. King attended a segregated public school in Georgia, graduating from high school at the age of 15. In 1948, King earned a psychology degree from Morehouse College and attended seminary school in Chester, Pennsylvania. He thrived in all of his studies and was valedictorian of his class in 1951 and elected student body president. He also earned a fellowship for graduate study. During the work on his doctorate, King met Coretta Scott, an inspiring singer and musician in the New England Conservatory School in Boston. They were married in June 1953 and had 2 sons and 2 daughters. In 1954, while still working on his dissertation, King became pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. He completed his PhD and earned his degree in 1955. King was only 25 years old. In December 1955, he led the first nonviolent demonstration of contemporary times in the United States, known as the bus boycott. This boycott actually lasted for over a year, 382 days. And on December 21st, 1956, the Supreme Court of the United States had declared unconstitutional the laws requiring segregation of buses. During these days of boycott, King was arrested, his home was bombed, he was subject to personal abuse, but at the same time, he emerged as a leader. Next, in 1957, he was elected president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was an organization formed to provide new leadership for the civil rights movement. In the 11-year period before 1957 and 1968, King traveled over 6 million miles and spoke 2,500 times. During this time, he also wrote 5 books as well as numerous articles. In these years, he led a massive protest in Birmingham, Alabama that caught the attention of the entire world, which inspired his letter, in quotations, letter from a Birmingham jail, a manifesto of the revolution. He planned drives in Alabama for the registration of Negroes as voters. He directed the peaceful march in Washington, D.C. of 250,000 people to whom he delivered his address, "I Have a Dream." He conferred with President John F. Kennedy and campaigned for President Lyndon B. Johnson. He was arrested upwards of 20 20 times and assaulted at least 4 times. He was awarded 5 honorary degrees and was named Man of the Year by Times Magazine in 1963 and became not only the symbolic leader of American Blacks, but also a world figure. At the age of 35, Martin Luther King was the youngest man to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. Unfortunately, on the evening of April 4th, 1968, while standing on the balcony of his motel room in Memphis, Tennessee, where he was about to lead a protest, he was assassinated at the age of 39. And to end, I want to end with a quote from Martin Luther. "I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant." Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. We're going to leave you as the host, if that's okay.
Oh, I just switched it over to you. Sorry, Judge.
Oh.
You can
maybe you could give it to Lindsay if you want. Either give it back to yourself or, oh, I have to do it, don't I?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, folks, for these technical difficulties here. Just give me 1 second. There we go. All right. So just remember to let people in as well. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a spectacular review of as much as you could do in the limited time that we have in connection with 3 amazing patriots who drove racial equality forward in our country. And I very much appreciate Karen's efforts in connection with that. I will be dealing with the documents that we are celebrating today. And those were both mentioned by Karen Wentz in connection with, actually there's 3 documents, and they were all mentioned by Karen in connection with her presentation. The first is the Emancipation Proclamation, and you note, if you were able to see it on the screen, Karen actually had a version of it up on the screen. We had lots of fancy stuff because that's what they used to do with those things. It was a very, very impressive and ground and earth-shattering document. The Emancipation Proclamation took effect on New Year's Day in 1863. Lincoln issued it as a wartime measure. Its effect was limited but amazing. It freed all the slaves that were in territory held by the Confederacy at the time. It was done for military purposes, and it did not, as Karen mentioned, emancipate all the slaves in the Union, in the border states, or even in places that were in the South that were occupied by the Union. But it set the marker that slavery was doomed. Once the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, there was no hope for maintaining slavery in the country. The second document is the Gettysburg Address. And Lincoln uttered those momentous words at the dedication of the National Cemetery for Union Dead at the Gettysburg battlefield on November 19th, 1863. Some have potently argued that it is the most profound speech ever given in the English language. The speech harkens back to our founding first principle of equality in an earth-shattering way. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. It's so short that it's simply more effective to quote it. fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth in this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead should not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Well, they don't make them like Lincoln anymore. Suffice it to say, that was a monumental speech. It really did change the course of the Civil War and also the course of our country. And we have continued to struggle for racial equality since before that Gettysburg Address, but really tried all much stronger way, in a much more passionate way, once Lincoln laid it out in such a simple but powerful passage. The last speech we'll be reviewing is Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. The speech was delivered on August 28th, 1963 at the March on Washington. And you saw from Karen's photo, there were hundreds of thousands of people there. And like the Gettysburg Address, the speech harkens back to the Declaration of Independence and the first principle of equality. So again, you're seeing this theme. There's the Declaration, the hypocrisy of the Declaration in connection with equality, and how the abolitionists and the civil rights movement latches onto the Declaration and uses it as an instrument for progress to live up to those first principles. Now, this work is trademarked. The Martin Luther King Jr. family has trademarked almost all of his works, but I do have some license for academic and educational purposes to quote a sliver of the speech. And I will do the portion where he's hearkening, at least one of the portions where he's hearkening back to the Declaration. He said, 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Remember, he's at the Lincoln Memorial, and so that's who he's referring to, obviously. But 100 years later, the Negro is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. In a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every America was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of the opportunity of this nation. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they shall not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Again, amazing words that have continued to inspire the nation. And he uttered those words in 1963. In the wake of that came the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and after that, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, leading to monumental changes in the country. These 3 documents, the Emancipation Proclamation, the Gettysburg Address, and I Have a Dream speech, were all important way stations that better fulfilling our promise for racial equality. Now, Patriot Week board member John Wilson was scheduled to discuss the flag that flew over Fort Sumter, which is the flag that we use in connection with this remarkable day, in connection with racial equality. But unfortunately, John has fallen ill. If you watched yesterday, you notice I pinch hit for him yesterday, and I'm going to pinch hit for him today. And this is the flag that flew over Fort Sumter. I'm using the virtual background, so I apologize for the distortion that may be happening with me, but you'll get to see the flag, and you can see it's very different than what you might expect an American state's flag to look like. As I said, this is the flag that flew over Fort Sumter when the Civil War broke out. You see that it has a diamond shape of 33 stars, and that was flying over the fort in South Carolina when the South decided they needed to bombard it to try to take it back, or take it from the United States, and that set off the fighting in the Civil War. At one point, the main flagpole was felled by a shot during the bombardment by Confederate forces, and Second Lieutenant Norman J. Hall rushed to retrieve the flag, and he remounted it on kind of a makeshift pole. The flag was eventually lowered by Robert Anderson. He was a major, and he was the commander of the fort at the time, on April 14th of 1861, when he surrendered Fort Sumter in the harbor at Charlestown, South Carolina. Again, the first shot to the Civil War. Now, it was interesting. Back then, at the beginning of the Civil War, they had no conception that the Civil War was going to be such a long conflict and such a bloody conflict. Everyone was under this mistaken assumption that the war would be over a few weeks, maybe a few months, that there'd be one or two big battles, somebody was going to win, and the others would go home, and this would all be over. Either the South would win its victory, or the North would crush it. And so at the beginning of the war, they were acting more like gentlemen. And the Confederate troops that took control of Fort Sumter let Anderson leave. They didn't take him prisoner of war or anything like that. They let him leave. And they said, take your flag with you. So he took the flag, and he went to New York City on an April 20th of 1861 at a rally. It was flown from the equestrian statue of George Washington in Union Square. And 100,000 people and more thronged at that Union Square, which many people thought was the largest public gathering in the country up until that time. The flag was then, so this is what happened. They thought this was going to be a short battle, ended up a short war, ended up it wasn't. And the treasurer, Samuel Chase, who was in charge of funding the Northern war effort, goes, I got no money. I don't know what am I going to do. And so one of the things that got dreamed up was to take the flag and auction it off to raise money for the war effort. And so they started in, it was either New York or Washington, D.C., and they auctioned it off, and then they kept going across the North and auctioning it off. He said, well, how can they do that? Well, someone would win the auction, grab the flag, and then eventually give it back, and then they would keep moving. I don't know if you've ever been to some of those church fundraisers like this. It's the same car over and over and over again is being auctioned off. It was kind of one of those deals. And so they raised what was the equivalent today of millions and millions of dollars for the Union war effort. And this became a major symbol of the Union and patriotism during the war. Now, Lincoln was brilliant. You heard a little bit of that from Karen and from the Gettysburg Address, which I read. And he had this fabulous idea as part of symbolism, a symbolic action. And he said, they recaptured Fort Sumter. And he said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take that flag that's been going around the North and all this stuff, and the first fall of Northern troops, and we're going to stick it to them. So we're going to refly that flag 4 years to the day it was taken down. So April 14th, 1865, Anderson was now back. He was a major general, and he raised the flag in triumph over the battered remains of the fort. And author Shelby Foote quotes Anderson as saying, I thank God that I have lived to see this day, as he took the flagpole's halyards in his hands. Reverend Henry Ward Beecher, who was the principal orator at the 1865 celebration, gave a very lengthy speech. He was like the Beyonce of his time. He was very popular. And he said at the conclusion of the flag raising ceremony, "On this solemn day and joyful day, we again lift to the breeze of our father's flag now and again the banner of the United States with the fervent prayer that God would crown it with honor, protect it from treason, and send it down to our children. Terrible in battle, may it be beneficent in peace, and as long as the sun endures or the stars, may it wave over a nation neither enslaved nor enslaving. We lift up our banner and dedicate it to peace, union, and liberty, now and forevermore." Now, this is where history becomes more creative than fiction, because the flag went up, and that was the same day that Lincoln was shot in the back of the head. So you couldn't make this stuff up, right? If I said I'm going to do this as a script, you'd say, well, that last part's too difficult to believe. We should leave that out. But that was the day that he was assassinated. We have a few minutes left. I didn't mention, usually I mention this at the beginning, I apologize. If you are interested in, if you have any questions, if you go down to the bottom of your Zoom bar, you'll see that there's a little bubble that says chat, and you are welcome to send in a little question. I know that we've gotten some in prior sessions. If not, then we'll just do a quick summary, but I would like to remind you that we do have 2 more days of Patriot Week where we're doing the Patriot Academy, 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time each day. We still have unalienable rights and limited government to go through, and some fabulous patriots and documents and flags as well. We have some really cool ones. We have the Gadsden flag, which is the don't tread on me flag, and we have your local flag. So there's going to be some stuff to be able to talk about, as well as James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence, the original Constitution. So we still have a lot of content to go, even though we're 5 days through Patriot Week. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I will just wrap it up. I've been promising that we'll wrap these up within an hour. So fellow Patriots, I hope you enjoyed and learned something in this session of our Patriot Academy. Please return for future sessions. Also, don't forget to check out Patriot Lessons, the American History and Civics podcast that's co-hosted by me, along with a couple of other Patriots. Our Patriot Lessons TV show, which you can get on demand on our website. We have lesson plans for elementary school all the way through college. We have daily celebrations. If you're stuck at home, you can't get out like most of us are, you can go there and do things by yourself or with your close family and friends. And we have a ton of other resources at patriotweek.org, so I encourage you to go there. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You also might want to check out my book, America's Survival Guide, How to Stop America's Impending Suicide by Reclaiming Our Founding First Principles in History. You can find that on americasurvivalguide.com, Amazon, and other online retailers. A lot of the themes that we go through Patriot Week happen to be in the book, including that we have forgotten our founding first principles in history, why that's a great threat to our survival as a free people. It goes through the American Revolution, the construction of the Constitution, the Civil War, the civil rights struggles, what the first principles are, and how to address the crisis that we're facing. You saw the quote from Lincoln earlier that only we can kill ourselves. We're too strong for anyone else to do it. That's why it's called How to Stop America's Impending Suicide, because if we don't understand our history and our founding first principles in our Constitution, we're toast. There's no way that we can survive as a free people. And there's a whole chapter dedicated to racial equality, which was today's theme, and many chapters based on gender equality, and it goes through unalienable rights, the whole 9 yards. With that, I want to thank you for your time, and we look forward to hosting you again tomorrow night and the night after. The night after is Constitution Day, which is the signing of the anniversary of the Constitution. We also have a toast to the Constitution. That's on Thursday I think it starts at 5:30. You can check the website for that. That's patriotweek.org. And you can log in and give a toast to the Constitution. We have some other events that are posted on the website, so you don't have to just go and do the Academy. There's a few other virtual options as well. Until next time, God bless you and God bless America.